Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I've got 10 o'clock here on my laptop. I did have my microphone muted, so a comment there from Carrie. Hopefully, the volume issue was just the fact that everybody was muted, myself included. But we're going to go ahead and get going. Welcome today. You're here virtually through Microsoft Teams to chime into gardening on the Gulf Coast. Today's presentation is going to be on tree care and tree establishment. My name is Boone Holladay. I'm a county extension agent here in Fort Bend County, and I do community horticulture education. Joining me today on the back side of the presentation will be Mr. Skip Richter. He's the county extension horticulturist in Brazos County. You may know him through lots of other formats. He does radio there in Bryan College Station for Texas A&M Public Radio. He also is a regular contributor to the Texas Gardener magazine. So he'll be in the background answering questions through the chat. The way we have this set up today is you are muted, just the convenience of us not having to be disturbed and have to mute and unmute and turn off video feeds, etc. We got that set as the norm. So the way we'll ask is that if you have questions up at the top in the center, there's a little voice bubble that says chat. You'll click on that. Just type your questions into the meeting chat, and Skip will be there. His tag on here actually says Robert Richter, but we all know him by Skip. And he'll be helping to wrangle those questions. If there's something that's pertinent for me to respond to during the presentation, he'll chime on and we'll discuss those. But he'll be doing his best behind the scenes to answer those questions if he can. Also providing links if there's some online materials and some websites that he might find applicable. Look for those in the chat feature as well. There was a question here right off the get-go from Doreen on the recording, and yes, I'll be going through a lot of information during my presentation, a little bit different format than we're used to, so just bear with me and stay with me. But we will have the presentation is recorded, and we will be providing that to you all. All the registered guests will get that information at a later date, so you can go back and review the material as it's available. So we are recording. We will have the recording to the presentation accessible, and you are muted. And if you have questions during the presentation or comments that you'd like to share, just type those into the chat, the meeting chat feature, and we'll go through those periodically. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay. So as I mentioned here, all right, let's just verify real quick if I can get a thumbs up, Skip, that you can see my screen sharing.
Yes.
Okay, good deal. Thank you. All right. So as I mentioned, this is part of a series that we've been doing since back in February called Gardening on the Gulf Coast. And this is a collaboration with extension horticulturists from Beaumont down to Coastal Bend, down in Corpus Christi area. And as you can see by the names here, we've moved around quite a bit. We've got Harris County, Montgomery County, Galveston, Brazos, which is Bryan College Station, Jefferson, which is Beaumont, back to Harris County over here in Fort Bend. So we've been moving around quite a bit throughout this series. This is where we're at right here, tree care and planting. And then we have one presentation left on December 7th, which is one of our roundtable discussions. And that's a great program. It's a good opportunity for people to ask specific questions that are timely and relevant to people all along the Gulf Coast. So make sure you put that December 7th on your calendars. Okay, let's see. Let's see if I can't get that to go. Okay. So today we're talking about tree care and planting. Quite a timely topic as we've dealt with a horrendous summer and we're seeing some big time stress on trees. So we may have trees that are sick, we may have dead trees, and we also may be thinking about an opportunity to plant some young trees in our landscapes to replace either these trees that we've lost or that we may at some point be losing. So just to kind of give you a little bit of structure of where we're going today is we're going to talk right off the bat about tree planting basics and resources to support those. Then we're going to get into some current tree issues that we're seeing, how to diagnose issues if you're starting to see some visual characteristics of stress or decline on those plants, as how you diagnose those and how to respond. And then we'll get into the bottom here with soil testing, irrigation, and herbicide use. Just things that are going to impact the health of our trees, things that we're doing that may be helping or otherwise may be disturbing or impacting the health of our trees negatively. So we are going to put that aside and we're going to go through some resources online here. Okay, so what we're seeing is my home screen here, and I've got my internet browser opened up and I have all these tabs across the top. Okay, so this is going to be our agenda that's going to guide us through the presentation here this morning. The first one that I'm going to take you to is this website right here. This is one of our sister agencies in the States, the Texas A&M Forest Service. And when we think about this group, we may think somewhere out in Nacogdoches or Temple, Beaumont area where we have a lot of pine forests or dense mixed hardwood forests. But the Forest Service is active throughout the state, and probably most relevant to our areas here is this tab here of community and urban forestry. So I just want you to know what great resources are available online, and this is one right here that we're going to get started with as we talk about trees in an urban community. So if we click on this, we've got there's services, some other resources throughout this, but let's go right over here to this tree planting guide. And I'm going to click on that. And it gives us a couple things right off the bat. It gives us this tree selector, custom tree selector, and tree planting and care. This is a database of trees that they have in their system. Depending on where we put in the state, we can start finding specific tree species or varieties that may work well for us. I'm going to look at this one right here, this tree planting and care. This right here is just fantastic. Okay, now I could put up PowerPoint here and I could show you all this and some slides, but just guiding you through these resources I think is going to be much better. Now, what we tend to say around here, at least along the Texas Gulf Coast, Southeast Texas region, is November 1st through really about February 15th is our timeline for planting new trees. We don't want to start in the summer because, as we've seen this summer, we can't hardly water enough to keep those trees alive. And then inversely, as we think about spring, we think about the spring vigor, the leaf out, that they come out in spring. For us, that's usually about April 1st, After April 15th is when we start seeing a big flush of trees coming out of winter dormancy and putting on growth. So the trees really need to be established by that point, which means that they need to have gone through initial transplant shock. So no matter how good of a job we do at planting these young trees, they're going to go through some stress. So we want them to get through that stress period, and start developing a root system to start to send these young root hairs out into the native soil, and get anchored down and start being able to absorb water, uh, oxygen through the soil, and nutrients prior to spring leaf out. So that if we wait later than February 15th, we're not really seeing that. So by the time these trees we're asking them to come out of dormancy and start growing, they're just not prepared for it if we wait after that mid-February timeline. And then after the spring leaf out, then we have the onslaught of horrendous summer stress, as we've seen this last summer and in summers within the last 10 years. Started off hot, started off dry, and if the tree's not prepared for that, then they're going to suffer prolonged and ongoing stress, and may end up being a tree that we would have to pull up and replace, and try over again. So let's avoid that. So first things first is stay within that timeline of trees. The other things to think about is look at your landscape and figuring out where you're trying to plant a tree, a suitable location. Make sure that we're staying away from utilities, power lines, underground easements, looking for energy efficiency improvements on the home. So it's putting the tree in a spot where it's going to help um, alleviate some of this direct sun exposure, particularly in mid to late summer, on the home, which is going to impact our energy use within the house. So a lot of good things to be thinking about before we, not only before we plant, before we even choose a plant uh, to put in there. So similarly here, and then this is great, how to select a tree at the nursery. When we pull this up, this is going to go into quite a bit of depth of what to look for. When we go to a nursery and we're trying to pick out a tree, we want a tree that looks healthy, so it's got a good green canopy on it. We want to look for misshapen trunks here that may at some point split away from each other. And then we want to pull the container off of the root system here. We want to inspect that root ball, make sure that it's healthy. If we start seeing these dark brown circling roots, or it looks like the container, the shape of the root ball is amassed into the shape of the container, then it's been in there too long. So you look for things to avoid and things to look for in a quality tree before we even purchase those trees from the nursery. And then down here, planting the tree. This is a fantastic diagram, and there's some additional information as we toggle through this, but this kind of sums it up. A lot of questions we get is what amendments do I need to put? Do I need to put some potting soil or some peat moss down in that hole, or some compost? And the recommendation is to backfill the planting hole with the original soil, because it's going to have to grow into whatever's out there anyway. So if we put some compost or conditioned soil in this hole, all we're going to really be doing is encouraging those roots to stay within that spot and not move out into the periphery of this native soil. If we just backfill with the native soil, that's going to happen much quicker. The roots are going to run through that and then run straight into the native soil outside of the planting hole. Further than that, we want to make sure that the depth of the tree is correct. So we want to see this buttressing here of this root flare. So that's where the side roots start to arch out away from the trunk. That needs to be exposed. So we don't want to plant the tree too deep in the hole where we cannot see those root flares. That's very important. And then when we backfill the soil here, backfill it level. We're not covering those root flares. We're putting a little berm way out here. This is the planting at the end of the planting hole, which is 2 to 3 times the size of the diameter of this root ball, which in most young trees is going to be 4 to 5 feet. And then we build up a little berm way out here of the soil, and then we're going to cover that from that point out all the way up here, almost to the trunk, but not to the trunk, with mulch, with a good layer of mulch. And that's doing a lot of things for our trees. One, it's insulating the soil temperature. It's keeping the moisture within the soil, and it's going to be minimizing weeds within this planting area. We don't want any vegetation within this zone here that is going to be competing with the tree as it's trying to establish. And then further, this mulch, what it does is it discourages you or your landscape maintenance provider from being tempted to damage the trunk of this tree. So they're having to stay way out here with the weed eater and the mower, and they're not getting anywhere close to the trunk of this tree. This right here is, this wrap around here is to safeguard that tree. But if we have the mulch going back 2 or 3 feet away from the tree, then that should not be an issue. So again, a lot of good resources here where we go through all these components of dealing with a young tree. Your ongoing maintenance of the tree, your pruning for fertility, and looking at, as the tree matures, how we might need to be doing some selective pruning on it, and expectations of it as it gets larger in the home landscape. So base considerations there is starting with the right location. Okay, so we need to know where we want the tree, why we want it there. Okay, what are the benefits of having the tree in that location? We need to identify the utilities, if there's power lines, or if there's underground easement, if there's utility cables underground. We need to make sure that we find those prior to doing any digging in the landscape. And then start looking for trees. One tool that I use here, and I'll try to find a way to get this sent out to everybody when we have the recording prepared. This is just a list that we've been working on here in Fort Bend County, and this is going to vary if you're down in Corpus Christi, or if you're over in Beaumont. This might look a little different, but this is kind of a short list of trees that we recommend here in our area, starting with the Mexican sycamore, fringe tree, selection of different oaks, Texas or Mexican redbud. Basically, we're not seeing a live oak on here. We're not seeing crepe myrtle on here. And basically the reasoning behind this is, this our common trees, which have been live oak, which have been green ash, which have been ornamental pear, and crepe myrtle. At some point, we're going to start seeing issues with these trees. And if that's the only tree species that we're planting in our communities, then we're going to be in big trouble. Like Dutch elm disease. If you go up to the northeast, significant numbers of landscape trees, which was this ash tree is the primary landscape tree, the canopy was diminished as that disease came on. We're starting to see these crepe myrtle bark scale moving into our region and having an impact on trees that prior to them were fantastic. And it may end up that we have to either limit the use of crepe myrtles, or we have to find new management strategies to deal with this pests that come on. So these trees, have been good hard workers for us. What I'm trying to accomplish here is to get people, as you have the opportunity to purchase new trees and put those in your home landscapes, be thinking about diversification of trees, because the more we can diversify our tree canopy, the more resilient we will make our tree canopy in the urban community in our neighborhoods. If we have one specific pest that impacts one specific tree species, we lose a couple trees possibly, but we don't lose our whole tree canopy, which in some neighborhoods, if they're almost 100% live oak, if we had oak wilt move into our area, which knock on wood, we have not seen pressure with oak wilt, that would have the possibility of eliminating most of our canopy. So we don't want to go there. So we're trying to encourage people to look at some of these other trees here to try to get you to think outside the box and utilize that opportunity to diversify. So again, I'm not going to spend much time on this actual um, list. We'll try to send this to you from the registration, and you'll get that next week um, when we have the recording ready. All right, so that's that one. Another good resource here in our area is the Houston Area Urban Forestry Council. And this is a group of urban forestry professionals that are basically wrapped together to help educate the community about trees. And so there's a lot of different activities that are done throughout the year. This right here is a good one, is this tree guide. Similar to the one that's on the Texas Forest Service, this has a list of trees. So we can click on this where it says large trees, and it's going to go through a list of trees for our area. It goes from the name, scientific name, benefits, and comments on each of those individual trees. So again, this is a really nice resource for us to learn about new trees and to think about um, trees. We've got the benefits, what to plant, where to plant it, so forth here as well. So some great local resources for us. All right, so what we've been dealing with in our area are some tree problems. And that this has been because our weather has been just insane. Um, if we think about back to 2011, we had our historic drought. It's been big ups and downs weather-wise uh, ever since, and the stress is really showing up on trees, established trees, and even young planted trees in the home landscapes. Um, well, we go back to Winter Storm Uri and move forward from that. So record cold on trees, and then we had this record heat and drought again this summer. Have really put a kind of the final nail in the coffin for a lot of trees that have been trying their best to deal with ongoing stress. But for some of them, we're seeing signs of decline. We're seeing secondary stress, and we're seeing trees that are just finally giving up because they've been working so hard to try to utilize carbohydrate storage to deal with stress that they finally ran out of their energy surplus. And we've seen a lot of trees midsummer, late summer, that just turn the lights off. And fortunately, a lot of these large established shade trees, once we see that complete brownout where the leaves are staying on the tree but they're brown midsummer, then it's a kind of a game over situation. So a good tool here. Well, let me go back real quick. So if we have just first stage questions, at least for us, is our master gardeners have a fantastic web resource here, but your county master gardeners or extension office may have a similar resource as well. So for us here, this is just fbmg.org. That's Fort Bend County Master Gardeners. We're going to go down to where it says contact us. and we have a submittal form. So if you have a tree that's not looking good, we can click on that, and it's going to ask us our information here, email, phone, what the questions, some details, and then the opportunity also to put a picture in there of the tree or what's going on with it, and we will address those. And we'll do some research on it. They'll consult with the agent, and we'll get back to you and kind of get this started so you might have an idea at least of what's going on with your tree. So that kind of moves us over here to this, and our plant disease diagnostic lab that's up in College Station. It's a great resource over here on this plant disease resources tab. There's some individual fact sheets on disease, and then we have this online plant disease handbook, which I've pulled up here, and it has a lot of great resources that are easily available. So let's close that one out. So with this one here, we can do list, and then if we just scroll down to trees, so within this, it's going to have us a list of some of our more common landscape trees at the home level. So a lot of problems we've been seeing is oak this summer. So I'll click on oak, and this is just going to kind of go through a full list of common diseases that we see on oak. So you can, based off of your master gardener evaluation or contact with your extension agent, you can go back through here and you can look at these individual diseases and try to correspond to see if maybe that is what is going on with you. Now I'm going to kind of scroll down to one. I think nope, we're not seeing that bugger here, but this one here. Now, unfortunately, this is what we're seeing a lot of right now. And this oak decline, it's not one specific thing. It's this combination of abiotic stress factors, fungal pathogens, and insects. And so what we're seeing here with a lot of oaks is older trees that went through the freeze, had some stress with that, uh, went through high rains, flooding, went through this summer with extreme heat and no water, and these are these environmental stress factors that compound and have an impact on the health of the tree and start causing stress. And then after we see the stress, then we start seeing these insects and these fungal pathogens moving in on those trees, and pouncing on the opportunity to get in and start working away at those specific trees. So what we see here, like with this, is you'll see partial canopy dieback. You'll see some of those top branches start to die out, or the leaves turning yellow. You'll start seeing at the base of the tree, you'll start seeing what we call water sprouts, or these adventitious sprouts coming out of the lower part of the trunk. All are signs that there's some activity up here in this canopy of fungal pathogens and insects that are damaging these lateral branches of the canopy, making the top part of the canopy die out and making those sprouts start to develop from inside the canopy. Unfortunately, once we see this, um, most of the final outcome is that this tree needs to be removed. And this is unfortunate for folks, but when we get to this point of diminishing returns, we may not see that tree ever recover and develop the shape that you would expect out of it aesthetically. So the end game may be to remove it. If you catch it early on, there may be some ways that we can remedy the issues and encourage the health of the tree. But in a lot of situations, these trees would just have to go away. Skip, are we seeing any questions coming in on the chat? can't see the chat box.
Boone, sorry, I was talking with the mute on. You would think
Oh,
now I've learned not to do that. I answered one that was regarding native and adapted trees in the chat. At some point, as you get toward the end, maybe we just open it up and let people ask you questions directly.
okay, sounds good. All right, so we talk about tree removal. The next question that we get from people are, how do we find reputable tree professionals? And this is kind of a challenge for us because as with extension, we're not supposed to, kind of go straight to a person. But what my response is go for a trained professional, somebody that has education in trees, versus just the economy tree company, particularly if we're trying to save a tree. So this right here, this Trees Are Good website, is sponsored by the International Society of Arboriculture. Sounds fancy, but this is basically just the international standard of certifying arborists across the world. And they're very active here in the United States. And so we'll go right here in the middle where it says find an arborist. And just for quick grins, I'll click on this again. And we don't know the name. We're trying to actually find somebody. So let's go over onto this side. This is international, so we have to find the United States. And then over here where it says postal code, we'll just put in my zip. I'm going to change this down to maybe 25 miles away. And I'm going to search this. And this pulls up a short list of certified professionals that are within 25 miles of my zip code. So we've got 26 records here, and all these individuals are certified through ISA. Now, the next thing that I kind of look for here is that if their business is listed, so we got this Meadows Tree Service, Cody's Trees, Shawnee's Tree, stuff like that. These are for-profit businesses. So these individuals would be the great ones to reach out to. Sometimes you'll come down, you'll see here, like this is an engineering firm. They're probably not going to be able to help you. Private consultant here. So most of these individuals are working with a professional tree care company. So that's great. Here's one here, City of Houston, Parks and Rec. This person here probably is not going to be able to help you. Okay. So just a good way for you to kind of whittle out people that may not be helpful, but once we move down this list, so if I clicked on this gentleman, James, it's going to give me the company that they work for, the address, phone number, and email and website. So all the really good information there to try to find a good arborist that will, one, first come out and consult the tree. If there's ways that they can improve the health of the tree, they'll offer strategies to do that, or otherwise offer you a plan to remove the tree. As with other service providers, we would recommend 2 to 3 consultations from different companies to maybe help you hone in on something that averages out to be the best plan for you moving forward. Okay, so that's the tree stuff. Really, what we're seeing as an outcome from this summer are really stressed trees, and even the trees that aren't showing stress are still stressed because of just this environmental roller coaster that we've had them deal with. So the next part of this presentation is what do we do now? Okay, we know the trees are stressed. We're going to try to help them out, but the flip side to that is that the disclaimer is that we don't want you to over care for them, to provide overabundance of response, because in a lot of situations we end up causing more damage to the tree as we think that we're trying to help it out. So the first part is going to be the fertility aspect, as we want to know the nutrient level of what the trees are living in. So the best way to do that is to conduct a soil sample. So this is our soil and water testing laboratory up in College Station, soiltesting.tamu.edu. And if we scroll down to the bottom here, we have this that says our submittal forms. And then we will do this urban soil submittal form. When we click on that, we have the opportunity to click trees or urban shade trees and put in our information. And then the lab is going to send back an analysis of what your nutrients currently are in the soil. And then they're going to give you recommendations on how to balance the nutrient level in the soil so that we have a consistent level of nutrients within the soil profile, so that the plants are getting exactly what they need when they need it. And as we start, if we're just throwing fertilizer around the tree or in the yard, without knowing the levels within the soil, we start getting some imbalances in there, and those imbalance of nutrients can start having a real impact on the health of the plants. So this is a good first step, is to go through this process. You click on this, it'll pull up the PDF on the form, how to conduct the sample, where to send it to, and then the process is easy from there, is that they'll email you your soil analysis and give you the recommendations of fertilizer moving into next year. So great resource. So that's fertility. So not to over fertilize, but also make sure that the plants have what they need. Okay. Next one is water. When plants get stressed, leaves start falling, our response is to water, right? And at this point, if we're seeing plant damage, it's too late. Midsummer, would have been a good idea for us to ramp up water through those stress periods to be able to maybe get moisture to percolate down into the root zone of some of these established trees. But we start questioning how much water and how often. And so a couple good resources. This first one here is our Texas ET network. This is evapotranspiration is what this means. But this is just a really good site, talks about water, how much water we've gotten. And it gives us a good idea. So just for the coastal region, I think it's probably similar, that week by week throughout the active growing season, most plants need about 1 inch of water to perform the way we want them to perform. 1 inch of water, and so that's rainfall and irrigation combined. So a lot of times we may not have a rain gauge out there. So this site does a lot for us, and so this is what you see when you click on the page. And so for me, my location, I'm going to scroll down to Richmond. And within this, for Richmond, it gives me a 7-day summary. So basically a week. So if we say 1 inch a week, we're going back here a week, and we got rainfall over here, and we're at almost 2 inches of rain for the week. Now this is a couple days late because of the data that it takes a couple days for the data to come in, but really here we're at 2 inches, so we would say we're in good shape here. Okay, we had a little rain here, we had some heavy rain, a little follow-up rain the next day. We do not need to be watering. So if you have an irrigation system that's automated to come on once a day, once every other day, twice a week, whatever, you need to turn it off, because at this point here, we've already had 2 inches. This is insult to injury if we're putting more water on now, because these trees, they've gone through summer with a whole lot of stress. We're probably seeing some root decline issues on the trees. So now if we're overwatering them, then we're basically drowning them through the root system. So just pull this up based off of your area. This one here is sponsored by the Fort Bend Subsidence District. More than likely in your area, there's going to be some similar data. If you see anything more than an inch over this past week, do not water. Pretty simple. Just do not water. Turn your irrigation system off. And honestly, from this point, November 1st through the middle of February, we would just turn those irrigation systems off permanently through the winter, unless we got into a real droughty type situation. We normally can just turn those off. If you like simplicity, that website was kind of tech focused. This is another one here that's called watermyyard.org. So just type in watermyyard.org. You can go through here and put in again. Let's put in my zip code and hit enter. And here we go. 0 inches of water needed, no water required. So that's pretty simple. If you need to know if your grass needs to be watered, right here, this just tells you. It's very simple. If there is a deficiency based off of rain, it will say here maybe 0.5 inches water needed, and then you could adjust your irrigation timing to apply 1/2 inch of water to get you up to that level. But probably through the winter, at least with the rainfall that we've been seeing, this may be the common situation. We're going to see no water required. So that's water through. So midsummer, when we got into this drought situation, we would probably say once a week is to try to do a deep watering, to apply that water in a way where it permeates and percolates down into the root zone. And we do that by a process that's called cycle and soak. So it's putting on, maybe 5 minutes of water, running through your other cycles in the landscape, coming back, watering maybe for 10 minutes, and doing this 2 or 3 times so that the water moves down in the subsoil instead of leaching off of the surface, basically wasting water. And we're just trying to get the water to go deeper into the root zone. Most of these trees, the established trees, have a root depth of about 18 inches. So we're trying to get as much of that depth as we can to be able to allow those trees to absorb the moisture through their fibrous roots. All right, so last one here I have, this is not an extension, but this is actually from one of our previous extension agents and professionals, but it does have a great blog of articles and content here. And this one is considering herbicide damage. Now, this is the big kicker here. So we've got freeze damage, we've got drought damage, we've had floods, all these ups and downs, and I'm afraid in a lot of situations we're unintentionally layering on herbicide damage onto these trees that have been going through so much environmental stress, that we're compounding that even further by utilizing herbicides for the grass and around these trees, without the knowledge that those products may be impacting the tree. Okay, so basically what this says here is that it comes down to this. The research shows that the total root area of a tree may be as much as 4 to 7 times the area under the canopy. Okay, which this is what we call the drip line. Okay, so some people, in theory would say, well, the roots are out at the drip line. Well, they really begin at the drip line and then they move out past that. Okay, covering a much greater area than the drip line further out. Okay, so if we have one tree, just hypothetically, in a homeowner, typical neighborhood suburban situation, if you have one tree in your front yard and you're considering that the canopy, that the root zone of that tree may be 4 to 7 times the area that's under the canopy, then those tree roots are covering your whole yard. Okay, so these chemicals that are in our herbicides, particularly if we look at weed and feed combinations or liquid herbicides, they're formulated to kill broadleaf weeds, okay? And trees are broadleaf plants, okay? So it's not going to be a situation where we're putting out enough of this chemical to kill the plant immediately, but it does cause serious problems to your trees, okay? So prolonged use of herbicides, whatever the formulation is around the root zone of your trees, you need to be very careful that you're applying the correct product the correct way, or just stay away from them if you possibly can. We'll look at other strategies to control the weeds in your lawn that may not have negative impacts on those trees, because they've been dealing with enough stress on their own through our climate. Let's not continue that stress with man-made situations. So that's either through herbicide, through over application of irrigation, and that's done through over application of fertilizer around the trees. So be careful about our TLC and how we're helping those trees, making sure that we're doing it appropriately. Okay. Make sure I covered everything. Tree basics, tree issues, how to diagnose issues, and testing, irrigation, and herbicide use. Okay. Well, that was a crash course through a lot of good resources. Again, went pretty fast on that. I went pretty fast on that today. But basically just to show you what resources are out there. There's a lot of fantastic stuff that's available for you 24/7. You will be getting the recording of this, so you can go back and review each of those individually on how to find those URLs and access those resources. So I'll go ahead and entertain a couple questions if we have any in the chat feature.
Boone, we had one ask about fruit trees sold in retail outlets that have product label information that you can review. I think he's asking which ones are most appropriate for your area, and then he refers to the Aggie Horticulture fruit page. So I think that. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. My apologies. Stephen was answering a question. I was reading the answer.
No, good. Well, thank you, Stephen B. I didn't know you were on with us today. So yeah, the Aggie Horticulture, the easy gardening guides that we have on there for fruit, nut, and for vegetables, really sum that up of what species of fruit we can easily grow in the home landscape, and also dives down into which varieties would be proper selections for your area.
I don't know if you can get to the chat, Boone, but if you were able to put some of the links of things you talked about to water my yard, I posted the treesaregood.com link for finding an arborist. We also had a question. Samia has a eastern redbud with a fungal disease. And is it worth spraying with a fungicide? And if so, what would you use?
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see the chat. I wasn't able to see the chat when I had it that way. Okay, so repeat that one again.
Eastern redbud with a fungal disease. It doesn't just say exactly where it is, but what type of fungicide would be appropriate for that?
I think my knee-jerk reaction is probably none. The I mentioned in the recommended trees, the Texas or the Mexican redbud are really the selections for us, because the Eastern redbud, more and more as we're seeing these intensive summer droughts and heat, they're really just showing stress. And then as we see the stress on these trees, then the next step, Mother Nature is going to come in there, and we'll start seeing disease and insect pressure. If it's a reoccurring issue and all we're seeing maybe is a little leaf spot disease on the foliage, um, the best technique for that is to do a fungicide application. And this is going to be one of our common garden fungicides that you would see at your nursery centers for a spring bud break application. So right when the foliage the buds are starting to swell, early season before they break open, that's going to be our prime time to apply a fungicide. But let's look at other issues, which would be including moisture stress or too much or not enough water at certain times of the year. Because I think if you address those, the fungus or the disease issue, I think minimizes.
All right. We have quite a few questions coming in. So the next one is a crepe myrtle covered with two things. One looks like moss and the other is green sheets of wrinkly material. Can you tell what those two things are?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and this is we're seeing a lot more of this around here as the crepe myrtles have become more mature. Um, if they're slowing growth, slowing in vigor, then we're not seeing this bark slough. So normally a crepe myrtle is going to exfoliate its bark throughout the year, and it's just like our skin cells, So they, as we may have skin issues, we're regenerating new skin cells and the old ones flake off. So crepe myrtle does a good job at that. But if it's not actively growing, not actively vigorous, then we start seeing a compounding of some of these surface organisms. And one is probably ball moss, and ball moss is related to Spanish moss. It's a bromeliad, and these are little gray, silver gray or greenish tufts that grow up towards the canopy. Um, and they're kind of hitching a ride on the tree. In most situations, they're not harming the plant, but they will compound. If the tree is not exfoliating that old bark, then the number of those start to build up, and we'll see clusters of ball moss growing up into the canopy, and then it can start being a problem. The second one's just going to be lichen, and lichen has a lot of different variations uh, of uh, of how it looks on trees. And this is going to be the silver gray and green. It looks like little coral growing on the bark, not harming the tree. Again, just hitching a ride. They're what we call epiphytes, so they grow up on other plants and other structures as well, and they're just taking advantage of sunlight and atmospheric moisture to survive. So they're not really a problem. But if I see a lot of lichen and if I see a lot of ball moss on any plant, it's just a sign to me that the plant is not healthy. It's not vigorously and actively growing. So if we focus on the health of the plant and encourage it to put on new growth, then I think some of those problems start to minimize.
Okay. Let's see. We had a question about pecan trees not producing. So you may want to comment on that. And I'm going to have to step away. So I know Stephen is on. If Stephen, if you could take over, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out with us today, Skip. Okay. Yeah. So going back to looking at this response here from Deb, some of these things, if these aren't recommended solutions, we may get ourselves some trouble recommending kind of home remedies. In this case, uh, yeah, that may end up setting back or minimizing the continual growth of moss, lichen, and ball moss, etc. But you may end up burning the foliage up on your tree as well. So be real careful with those. If you need help with a recommendation, always go to your master gardener hotlines, your extension office, making sure that you're getting quality answers. Um, Stephen Brugerhoff put a good article in here about lichen biology. Um, and that'll kind of do a deep dive into that topic for us. I like this one about pecans. Whoever it was that asked about pecans not producing. Hey, you're not alone this year, bud. We just have not seen pecans really in our area, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that, but primarily was because of the crazy weather that we had really early season here in our part of the coastal bend. Is we had this warm trend, early warm weather and dry weather during bud break and flowering. And so what it caused is different pecan trees to either leaf out or flower at different times. In most years, if we have good weather and good soil moisture, most of the pecan trees leaf out roughly about the same time, and they're on this a very similar foliage and flowering schedule. So all the flowers of all the trees kind of open up within about a 2 to 3 week period, and we have really good cross pollination. But this year we didn't because the trees were confused. They were slow to come out of dormancy because there wasn't enough water, and the temperatures were warmer than they normally are. So in our orchards here in Fort Bend, we had trees that were fully leafed out, and then right next to it, we had trees that were still in complete dormancy. And that causes real big problems with the trees. But for us, what it means is that we don't see a whole lot of fruit because there wasn't a lot of active cross pollination or pollen shed moving across from tree to tree. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed that next year we might see some better or more conducive weather in the spring um, to help us to get some pecans in our bellies. We all love pecans here along the coast. All right, so let me go back up here. See if we can't dig through some of these questions, unless Steven's been working through them. Gosh, a lot of good questions here. Suckers from Jen. On these stress trees, when we see those suckers or those water shoots starting to develop from the base, that's just a real bad sign, unfortunately, and I'm sorry. Sometimes we have to be kind of the Dr. Phil of horticulture, but that's really it's a last ditch effort for trees to stay alive because there's something going on with the canopy. Depending on the tree species and what you're trying to do with it, um, you might be able to remove those suckers from the base. If it's a small tree and you're seeing some suckers, maybe you can reestablish the shape of the tree with those. But if it's a large established shade tree and you're seeing interior suckers within the core of the canopy or down at the root base, it's a sign that the vascular system of the trunk and the large lateral branches have been compromised out by insect, by disease, and more than likely those trees are going to have to be removed. Question from Peggy on the apple tree. This is probably because one of winter chill. Most of the apples, even some of the varieties that are touted for us this far south, did not receive the adequate chill hours this last winter. And so the flowering of those trees were either way off, they didn't flower, or they were not able to cross pollinate with an acceptable variety. Thus, we wouldn't see fruit on those plants, or we see poor poor flowering and poor fruit. Unfortunately for apples as a species, it's more common than that's the case than you seeing fruit. So just be patient. One of these years, you might enjoy a harvest off of them. Just keep the trees healthy. Um, I'm we're going to be rolling off here very shortly, but what I'll do as far as all the web URLs and the links that I went through, I'll attach an additional page. So when you get the recording emailed to you, I'll make sure that I include a list of all of those links that we discussed today, so that you have those for your use as well. How to improve the vigor of crepe myrtle. Um, this is going to be looking at the soil is going to be number one, is making sure that we've got the nutrient loads correct in there, making sure the tree has enough sunlight. It's a full sun tree. So if you got it in partial shade, it's just not going to be great. So you need to be honest about that. And watering, making sure that we're giving it adequate water, but really not too much. If we overwater or if we over fertilize these trees, we start seeing aphid development, whitefly development, and subsequently we see this honeydew, which turns into sooty mold. So just the appropriate TLC of the appropriate location of the tree with full sun, and then you could start seeing improvements on the plant. Yeah, I think Steven's been doing a pretty good job here of talking about the ball moss, lichens, etc. For us, let's focus on the health of the tree. Try to increase vigor. And once we have new growth, then a lot of that old bark that has lichens and ball moss on it will start exfoliating off of the tree. Okay, so it's just about 11 o'clock, and we're going to wrap this thing up here today, folks. I appreciate your time, and look for the follow-up from us with the link to the recording and the additional links that I talked about in the presentation. So appreciate you, Stephen Brugerhoff from Galveston County, for coming on to help tackle some of the chat. Again, Skip is already gone, but I want to thank him for helping out behind the scenes as well. Again, just to remind you, we do have one last class within this series for the year, and that's going to be on December 7th, and that's our roundtable discussion. So I'll be writing down those questions that you have, and you'll be there around the table with some great resources, extension agents from across the region to help offer their solutions for you for your problems, or maybe even come in and brag about something that's doing great for you. We also like success stories as well. We don't always have to have the doom and gloom stuff. So with that, we will wrap this up and shut her down. Again, thanks everybody, and have a great day, and get outside and go do some gardening. Y'all take care.